Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 26.1 AI Podcasts. Today, we're excited to have Michel Lopez join us, and we're going to discuss the challenging aspects of collecting data for voice and AI. Hello,
Welcome.
Michel.
Thank you for having me.
Michel, we've spoken a little bit already in a different context, but let's kick it off with how you got started with computing, because I think that's very interesting, where you ended up in the Middle East and in Thailand
Yes,
teaching AI at some point.
yes. So I grew up in France. I'm French originally, and I studied AI in like 85 or so when nobody knew what AI was. And then yes, I was sent by the French government to teach AI actually in Saudi Arabia. Did that for a year and a half or so. Then I moved to Thailand, where again I taught AI over there in a university. And well, AI was way too young at that time, and so I could, it's not something I could like explore professionally. So I switched to actually just developing like general purpose business software for companies there, and started my small software company in Thailand. Then I got recruited by a larger startup, first in Thailand, then they moved me to Hong Kong, then they moved me here to in the US in the Silicon Valley. Did that for another 2 years or so, and then I was laid off in 1999. And then after a few different things, I decided to turn to translation. I didn't want to do software anymore, so I turned to translation. Started in a small company, and then we started adding. Initially it was only English to French, but then we started adding languages, adding services. And a few years ago what happened is some of our large tech clients here approached us to help them on their voice assistant in different languages. And so that was, yeah, like you say, there's some serendipity here. That's at the end of the day, I'm coming back to AI from a different angle.
Voice assistants are a big hot topic right now, but before we get to that, I'd like you to touch a bit on AI back in the 1980s. I guess it would have been early 80s that you studied it. Was it what that was not probably a popular major at the time, or wasn't it? What was that back then?
No, that was the yeah. Nobody knew about AI. I mean, when I studied AI, I mean, it was at a time where the first IBM PC was on, so was out in the market. So yeah, there was nothing. Nobody knew about anything. But surprisingly, if you look at what people are doing now with neural networks and things like that, I mean, this is exactly the same thing as what I was teaching in at the time. The difference is not very important. I mean, the algorithms, the training algorithms, of course, have improved, but the main difference is the computing power. At the time, you could only do a network with just a few nodes, and so you could not do much. But now, the I don't know how many billion times faster computers go. So that's, but again, as far as the technology, the what's behind AI is hasn't evolved that much actually.
What kind of computational machine are you using at that point in 1985? I mean, your students, if you give them an assignment, where are they running this on?
At the time, I think it was just before the S400. I mean, you were working on like pretty big computers. I mean, that was after the tapes and all that, but it was just the beginning of those very large computers where you would have to input your program and on a terminal. And then while I was a student, that was the time that the first PCs arrived. So that was the big novelty at the time.
And then now, fast forward to E2f. What sort of technologies do you guys surround yourself with today compared to that?
So we have kind of two arms in our business. We have a translation, localization side, and we have a data collection side. So on the translation side, when I started 15 years ago, we were only using humans basically translating and reviewing every piece of document websites. But nowadays we use a lot of AI, in the sense we use machine translation. So we don't machine translation is not perfect, but in the last few years it has come to the point where you cannot use machine translated content immediately on a website, for example, but a good translator can review the output of machine translation and increase his or her productivity by maybe, depending on the topic and the language, between 200 and 500%. So it's a tool that we use daily, basically. So for, I would say, like for marketing content and things of very high level linguistic nature, you don't use machine translation. You start from scratch as a translator. But as soon as you're talking about technical documentation, about many pages on your website, you use machine translation as the first pass, and you just review the output.
And this problem is not
So
completely solved yet, right? I mean, there is an error level still, correct?
yes, there is still an error level. So there's, as far as machine translation engines, well, you have what the vanilla ones, that you can use, like the Google Translate and all those. But then professionals, we use custom translation engines. So we train a specific engine on a particular content, right? So if you if I have a lot of content for a particular client that has already been translated by humans, I will use that content, multilingual content, to train an engine. So based on that, whenever I present the engine with a new sentence in English, the translation will be using the terminology that that particular client is using. We may be using their style as well. There's going to be a few mistakes here and there, but overall the quality will be pretty good with those custom trained engine.
On these translation engines, are they geared for a specific language family?
They do work in differently in different languages. Yes. So obviously the when the sentence structure in some languages is very close to English, the quality will be better, right? So Dutch, for example, is a very good example, because Dutch is interesting because there's not too much content available publicly, right, to train the engines. So you would say that the quality wouldn't be very good. However, because the sentence structure is very similar to English, those engines work pretty well. Now you have languages like Japanese, for example, where the sentence structure is almost reversed compared to the English. In most cases, they put the verb, for example, at the end of the sentence instead of at the beginning or close to the beginning, like in English. So that's the engines have more trouble to provide very good quality output. But still, even in those languages, it's working fine. So the languages where it doesn't work well is the languages where there's not a lot of content publicly available, so the engines are hard to train, and the sentence structure is quite different from English. So when you have the combination of two, then the quality goes down.
So, which
But
languages haven't you handled yet?
well, typically, since we work in we translate a lot of websites and apps and marketing material for tech companies, so we tend to usually translate into 10 to 20 languages. So that's usually what those companies do. The very large guys, the Microsoft, Google, and all those people, translate in over 100 languages, but most apps would be translated in 10 to 20 languages, because that you cover over 90% of the worldwide market with the 10 largest languages. So typically, people would translate in European languages: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Dutch. Those are the main ones. And then in Asia, you would translate in Japanese, Korean, Chinese, traditional for Taiwan and Hong Kong, and simplified Chinese for China. And that's, with that, you already cover a big size of the market, especially since you can use your Spanish with a bit of difference, but you can use that in Latin America. Same for Portuguese and Brazil, so you cover a lot. And then some companies, so when you want to expand a little bit your globalization efforts, then people would go typically in Russian, Turkish, Indonesian, and by that time you're about almost 20 languages, and you cover big amount of people.
In the Japanese example, where the translation engine doesn't particularly handle an uh, ah, agglutinative language like that, is that a sense where it fails fairly consistently in a certain way so that an expert human translator can identify that and they still get a productivity boost?
Yes, yes, yes. Even in Japanese, I mean, in pretty much in every language, even if the quality is, unless the quality is really bad, but even if the quality is kind of average, there's a productivity increase compared to starting from scratch. And again, I mean, you could go to several 100%, especially if you, what we are trying to tell our clients is like when, if you produce an English source which is clean, and there are actually tools to do that. There are tools that will help writers to produce English content which is fluent, like simple sentences. Always use the same word for the same concept. Things of this nature. You avoid sentences with subordinates and things like this. They're pretty much every even like a standard a machine translation engine would work pretty well, and then the productivity would increase by again by a factor of several 100% in some cases. The most complicated thing for us is to convince translators to use that, because many translators, particularly freelance translators, are proud of the way they write, right? So if you tell them, well, sorry, you're not going to be able to translate from scratch anymore, you're going to review what has been translated by a machine, well, they don't like it, right? So we've been, the whole industry, the whole translation industry has been kind of fighting. I mean, the companies have been fighting against the freelance translators to get them to adopt the technology. I mean, nowadays, people going out of school, translators just out of school, are more willing to do that. But people who've been translating by hand from scratch for 15, 20 years, they have a hard time understanding that, well, it's better for them, it's better for everybody if they accept to review what has been translated by a machine.
Isn't there some human in the loop or a way that they can be involved in that process to help build the data set to use for better translation? And
Uh, Initially, yes, but they do that. They do. I mean, all those engines are being trained by content that is translated from scratch by humans, so they do participate in the process. And then when you train a specific engine for a particular client, they are involved in the what's called terminology management. So every client, there's two things that you do for a client and that you try to train the engine upon is the terminology, meaning that every company uses particular words, whether it's in English or in other languages, to make sure that you capture exactly their industry and the way they want to talk about their products, and also the style. So, for example, there are, like in European languages, whether it's German, Spanish, French, there's always two ways to address a user. You can be formal, use the Sie in German, or vous in French, or usted in Spanish, or you can be informal, use du in German, tu in French, and tu in Spanish, right? So that's very important. Like different companies addressing their users in different markets will want to be more formal or less formal, right? Usually, most people will use the informal form in German, kind of the formal form in French, and in Spanish, it depends. So yes, when you train the engine, those are things that are very important. If you train the engine with the wrong level of formality, the wrong terminology, then the translators will have a lot more work to do in post editing. So it's important to involve them early in the process.
Michel and I, we spoke abstractly about some of Mozilla's efforts in getting some speech tech going on some of their programs. And Michel, I shared with you the challenge they have. They have a common voice project where I see as of today they've validated 68 hours of recordings that people have contributed freely. Maybe get into the sense of scale needed to really to be
Yes.
effective for these voice assistants.
Yeah, it depends what you want to do, right? So when you launch a new voice assistant, and that has been the case with all the big names of the market, they've been training, they've been using data sets that are, I would say, like mainstream English spoken by mainstream Americans, right? Uh, I think there's a podcast that you recorded the other day, and then again about Mozilla Voice, where they say that they trained that by having just I think students, or I forgot who that was, reading from public domain books, right? So yes, you get to a certain level this way, but uh, if you want to really to address the general population and all domains, this is going to very quickly show its limitations, right? So uh, I mean, everybody, all of us have used voice assistants, and for example, for myself, you may have noticed I have a French accent. If I talk to my phone, he won't understand me, right? So if anybody who has a voice assistant would like to my voice to be understood, well, they will need to have thousands of hours of people with a French accent speaking English. If you use only a model that's been trained by people who were born in the US, it's not going to work currently.
So I mean, someone's going to get left out, right? I mean, it's impossible to do everything for every.
Exactly.
Is there any concerns you have about the fairness of that, like saying that a certain race or social class or whatever may get left out of a conversation, not have these tools made available to them because the model wasn't trained on their language?
I mean, this is not, my personally. I mean, I feel left out, right? As I said, I'm this French guy with this French accent, so I'm left out. So I tend not to use it, right? So I think your previous speaker was explaining that, right? That people have an emotional reaction, right? When they even my last name is mispronounced, right? My first name is mispronounced in English. My last name, which is a Spanish last name, if I use my voice assistant set it up in French, it will pronounce it improperly, right? So you will not say Lopez, you will say Lope, because it thinks it's a verb that is the easy in French is a conjugation of the verb, right? So yes, people have an emotional attachment, and that's a little bit of an issue that I think all the large companies are facing nowadays, because they realize that the voice and the recognition of the voice is very important for people.
But it really reflects. I mean, it's ironic, that you're the creator of some of this technology, and you're also less understood than some. But it really kind of shines some light on the idea. There's places where this technology may not belong. Are there any areas where you think it should never be? Do you ever see any spaces where you're like, well, we're not ready for that?
What we are doing here in this industry is basically we are collecting data based on our clients' requirements, right? So if our client wants to improve their understanding of, as I said before, software engineer or movies in a particular setting or whatnot, so what we will do as a company is recreate the environment, right? And then hire people with the right background, the right sometimes technique background, sometimes professional background, and have them speak freely as they would in normal life. And then that's what our client will use to train their engines.
What I'm getting from my conversation also is even if there are huge advances in computation power, for humans to really interact with voice in this kind of seamless AI experience, it's still going to be years just because of all the data that needs to be collected. You're talking about thousands of hours to train a voice assistant to be effective, and a, a working year in the United States is generally accepted as 2,000 hours. There's just this time component of collecting the data and getting it ready to train these models that just seems it's going to lag way behind computational advances.
Uh, Probably. I mean, there might be also, it might be that the engines themselves are improved. I don't know. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not working on the engine, right? We are working on the collection only. But yes, from what I see on the collection, and yes, that's you need hundreds of hours, thousands of hours if you want to address a specific demographics, and then have them, understood in a particular context. That's what we see. So yes, as as those voice assistants are becoming more and more global, yes, they need to get data sets, either public data set or private data set, or they ask company like us to produce a specific data set. And as they go into different countries, different ethnic groups, accents, professions, they for the time being, they yes, they need to have additional data sets to fine tune their engines, otherwise it won't work. So yes, in a way, it's an endless pursuit for them, because they need to keep improving. Yes.
What kind of people contribute their voice for these kind of data sets? If you have some classically trained actor with perfect diction, that's not good
No,
preparation for
that's
real life
that's
use.
that's that's not what we would do. So, for example, if I was taking the example of software engineers before, if my clients wants to understand software engineers, well, I'm going to recruit software engineers for this project, and then put in place the technology to record them, transcribe what they're saying, and then produce a complete annotated data set, and then that's what the client will use to further train the engine. So yes, I mean, while you guys are, I could imagine having both of you talking about software, and you would be candidates, right, for this kind of study. But that's, yes, that's in real life. That's what we do. We recruit people who are in the actual demographics. That's the only way to produce content that makes sense. I cannot ask two random people who don't know anything about software to just to read a manual about software. They would not have the right intonation. They wouldn't speak the way that you guys speak when you speak with each other.
So you've been in this space for such a long time and all over the globe. Where do you see where do you see it going next? Where, if you fast forward 5 years from now, what is this technology going to look like?
I don't know. Frankly, I wish I would know. I mean, I might know more about the translation side of it, that on the voice assistant side of it. On the translation side, what we see happening again is that maybe in a few years, maybe 1% or 2% of the content will be translated by humans. That would be your advertising campaigns, your marketing web page. This one, you would never trust a machine to do that. Then maybe the next 10-15% will be translated by a machine and reviewed by a human, and the rest will be fully translated by machines with just a little bit of engine tuning, but no human in the loop as such. On the voice assistant side, it's more difficult to know, because I don't think I have particular insight on that to see how far the technology can advance as far as really understanding all everybody speaking about everything.
On the translation engines, are there particular pairs of languages that work particularly well? Is it something like French to English, or is it like German to
Yeah,
Spanish?
European. I mean, it really, again, it depends on the what they call the corpora, that the corpus, or the data sets, if you wish, that you have access to, right? So if you look at all the main European languages, there's a huge corpus, just by crawling the web, that is available. And then you have like formal corpus. For example, the European Union translates everything they have in all languages, right? That's in their charter, and they make that available. So you can have access to all the translation done by European Union. So that's millions and millions of translation segments. So that has been helping a lot people developing engines to make them very high quality early on. So now, if you're saying, like a Korean to Indonesian, I don't know whether there's any been, whether there's any even a translator translating from Korean to Indonesian, right? So that's just not possible. So what all those engines are doing now, so you would not translate from Korean to Indonesian, you would translate from Korean to English, and then from English to Indonesian, but you lose both sides, right? So at the end of the day, your translation might not be very accurate.
Hmm.
But yes, people tend to use you tend to use English as a pivot. Although some of the engines nowadays, they found out that I think Google has found out that uh, it's like if the machine translation engines themselves are creating their own intermediary language. Yeah, they don't actually know exactly what happens, but with that's the issue with deep learning, right? You give things to a machine, and then you don't really know what internal representation it creates. But it seems, from what Google scientists believe, that their own engines are creating a language independent representation of the world, if you wish. So that they have been able to translate, like I said before, from Korean to Indonesian, although they don't have a corpus. But they have Korean to English, they have English to Indonesian, but when they train their engine, it seems that the engine will go from Korean to Indonesian, but by creating some kind of language in between. I don't know whether
Interesting.
I'm very clear, but yeah, that's
Yeah, and it gets really philosophical quick about language too, doesn't it?
yep, yep.
Well, we're closing in on our 26 minutes, so I want to give you an opportunity to first of all, thank you. It was very great to have you on, and also, is there anything you would like to leave behind to the audience regarding how to contact you or your company or anything?
Yeah, if anybody wants to contact me, my email address is my initials, ml at e2f.com, my company name, e2f.com.
Well, that's the shortest email ever. Okay,
Yep.
perfect.